to get the upper bound and lower bound for addition, when for a sum, for a difference, for product, and for quotients. So here you will have to use the logic of when with this operation, is it going to give me a larger value? Then accordingly, I will have to put the upper bound and lower bound for the components that are involved in the addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. See, for example, if you have 136 times 26, these are given, these two numbers are given, these are quantities, these are measurements that are given to the nearest whole number. I want the upper bound and lower bound for the product. So when you are multiplying, when you multiply two large numbers, the product is definitely going to be larger than when you multiply two other smaller numbers. Keeping this idea in mind, we will see what is the upper bound for 136 and what is the upper bound for 26. The upper bound, because this is given correct to the nearest whole number, nearest integer or nearest whole number. So I have to add 0.5 to both. So the upper bound will be 136.5 and the upper bound for 26 is 26.5. So the upper bound of the product will be 136.5 into 26.5. So what is that? 136.5 times 26.5, that gives me 3617.25. This is the upper bound for the product. Now what is the lower bound? The lower bound for 136.5, the lower bound the lower bound is, you tell me now, what is the lower bound for 136? It is 136 minus 0.5, which is 135.5. What is the lower bound of 26? That will be 25.5. So the lower bound of the product will be 135.5 times 25.5. So let's see what that is. 135.5 times 25.5, that gives me 3455.25. So this is the lower bound of the product and this is the upper bound of the product. So when it is multiplication, you just follow the same thing. Get the upper bound of both the factors, multiply. Get the lower bound of both the factors, you multiply. And you can be sure that the product is never going to be less than 3455.25 and it is never going to be more than 3617.25. So that will be the upper bound and this will be the lower bound. Now what about division? You have to be careful when your question involves division. For example, if you have 900 divided by 6 times 5 plus 4. So in the denominator you have an expression 6 times 5 plus 4 and these numbers are given correct to the nearest whole number. You can see all are whole numbers here, no decimals. So let us write the upper bound, lower bound for each of them and see how to calculate this quotient here. So the upper bound for 900 is 900.5. Lower bound for 900 is 899.5. Upper bound for 6 6.5, lower bound for 6, 5.5, upper bound for 5, 5.5, lower bound for 5, 4.5, and so also for 4. Upper bound for 4, 4.5, lower bound for 4, 3.5. Okay, we have the upper bound, lower bound for all the 4 numbers that are there in the fraction that has been given to us. So to get the upper bound, first let me find the upper bound. I choose the upper bound for the numerator, that is 900.5. And for the denominator, I choose the lower bound. See, when I divide in a fraction, when the denominator is small, the value is larger. For a smaller denominator, the value is larger, and for a larger denominator, the value is smaller. So, because 1 by 2 is greater than 1 by 3, 1 by 2 is greater than 1 by 8, because for a smaller denominator, the value becomes larger. So, keeping that in mind, I will put the lower bound for 6. So, the lower bound for 6 will be 5.5. And what about 5 and 5 plus 4? For that also I will have to put the lower bound. So that I am going to take 4.5 plus 3.5. I am using all the lower bounds for the denominator. I am making the denominator smaller so that the value of the fraction that I am going to calculate will be the larger value. So now I have 900.5 divided by 5.5 into 8. So that gives me, whatever that answer is, that gives me the upper bound. Now for the lower bound, the numerator I keep the lower bound, which is 899.5, and the denominator I am going to make as large as possible. That means I am giving the upper bound for the denominator numbers. So what do I have here? 6.5, 5.5 and 4.5. So that will be 899.5 divided by 6.5 times 10. So this is going to give me the lower bound. This value of the fraction cannot go below this. So that becomes the lower bound. And when I do this on the calculator, what should I remember? I first type in 900.5, the upper bound, divided by open parentheses 5.5 times 8, close parentheses, and answer 20.465. 20.466 maybe. Yeah, 466. So I'll write, just keep it as 47. Now for the lower bound, 899.5 divided by open parentheses 6.5 times 10, close, enter. 13.83, 13.84. So this is the upper bound of that calculation, and this is the lower bound. This is useful when you find the area, perimeter kind of questions. You have to keep this in mind. Now work out the upper bound and lower bound of 64 times 320, where the factors are given correct to 2 significant figures. So they have been given to two significant figures. So now I have to find out the upper bound and lower bound for these factors. So upper bound for 64. So that would be 64 plus, I need one more, so 64. What do I add here? 0.5. So 64.5, and the lower bound for 64 will be 64 minus 0.5, that is 63.5. Now what about 320? Upper bound for 320, that would be 320 plus 5, 325, and lower bound for 320 is 320 minus 5, 315. Now for the product, upper bound of the product, that will be 64.5 times 325. If it's a product, just take upper bound for both the factors. Similarly, for lower bound, it will be the lower bound, that is lower bound of both the factors, 63.5 times 350. So that gives you the upper bound and lower bound. Now we will take one rectangle, and we'll try to get the area and perimeter, the upper bound and lower bound for the area and perimeter of this rectangle. Now this length is 4.86 meters and this width is 3 meters. Both are given correct to 2 decimal places. Now perimeter is equal to 2 times L plus the width, length plus width. So for the upper bound of perimeter, we write 2 times the upper bound of the length, that is 4.865, plus width, it is 3.00, right? So it will be 3.005. Do you get it? It is correct to 2 decimal places, so it is 3.00. Now I have to add half of 0.01, so that will be 0.005. So this is the upper bound of the width. So you can calculate this using your calculator. What will be the lower bound of perimeter? That will be 2 times the lower bound, 4.855, plus subtract 0.005 from this, so 2.995. This gives the lower bound of the perimeter. Use your calculator and get this answer. Now for area, what is the formula for area? Length times the width. What is the upper bound of area? Use the same two upper bound and lower upper bound of the length and width, which is 4.865 times 3.005, and the lower bound will be 4.855 times 2.995. So we have to be careful, even if it is just one digit, 3 meters, when it is given correct to 2 decimal places, you will have to consider it as 3.00. And then add 0.5 and subtract 0.5 to get the lower bound, upper bound. Now let us do one subtraction. Say if I have say 19.3 minus 6.7. This subtraction, I want to find the upper bound and lower bound of this quantity, this difference, where the numbers are given correct to 1 decimal place. So the numbers are given correct to 1 decimal place, 1 decimal point. So we'll find the upper bound of 19.3 and the lower bound of 19.3. The upper bound would be 19.35 and the lower bound would be 19.25. Now what about 6.7? Upper bound of 6.7 will be 6.75 and the lower bound of 6.7 will be 6.65, right? Now when it is subtraction, When you subtract a smaller quantity, you will get a larger answer. When you subtract a larger quantity, you will get a smaller answer. Keeping that in mind, to upper bound of the difference will be upper bound of the first number minus lower bound of the second. When I'm taking away the lower bound, I get a larger answer. So that is going to be my upper bound of the difference. So here it is going to be 19.35 minus 6.65. And the lower bound of the difference will be the lower bound of the first minus upper bound of the second. It will be the reverse of what you did for the upper bound. So from a smaller, the lower bound, you are taking away the upper bound. So you get this least possible difference. So what is the lower bound of the first number? 19.25 minus the upper bound of the second number, 6.75. Which you can easily calculate. Okay, so be careful. These upper bound, lower bound questions are quite simple. You just have to get the range. But then when you are doing this subtraction, when you are doing division, you have to be careful. For subtraction, the second number, the one that you subtract, you will have to supply the opposite. For upper bound, you have to give the lower bound of the second number and vice versa. Similarly, also for division, the one that is in the denominator, you will have to switch. If you want the upper bound, you give the lower bound of what is there in the denominator and vice versa. So be careful while you do calculate the upper bound and lower bound of these complex problems.